companies that outperform those that don't through innovation. So, of course, most are keen to advance in this area. And in China, rising wages and the push for high-tech progress are driving innovation to be more vital. But wanting innovation and achieving it are two different things, as many companies have found to their cost. Today, we'll look at what China's firms are doing and what practices they can introduce to energize their innovation engines, and what policies are in place to shore up innovation development of Chinese enterprises. To help us explore this topic, for the first part, we'll be joined in the studio by Professor Carl Fei from Aalto University School of Business in Helsinki, Finland, who was the Dean of Nottingham University Business School, China from 2011 to 2015, and with Li Min Oh, Chief Strategy Officer of Peacebird. And for the second half, I'll be talking to Charles Liu, founder of How Capital. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to Dialogue, gentlemen. With the full-blown trade war looming large on the horizon, the word innovation appears in the daily vocabulary of Chinese entrepreneurs and authorities at different levels in this country. So what can be done by Chinese companies to survive and thrive, Carl?
Well, I think that there are a number of things that need to be done. I've in fact recently done a study that is looking at what are the management practices that are most important to help companies be innovative. This is combining the results of all other studies that have been done, finding the average results. And what we find is that the most important thing for Chinese companies is to focus on knowledge management systems. That is an ability to collect what different people inside the company know and different people outside of the company know. Secondly, we find that having a strong, clear organizational culture that can guide employees is really important, especially for larger companies where the leader can't be with them every day. And third, we find that it's really important to have good external networking. That means that you're able to collect information about what's happening in different places around the world. Interestingly, this is a little different for the case of China compared to the case externally. In China, the knowledge management systems are even more important, and the networking is even more important than what we find in other places. Just one other final point, and that is another management practice in our research is strategy. And we look both at some different types of strategy, and we look at how clear and strong the strategy is. And our finding is that it's important to have a clear strategy more so than which strategy you are pursuing.
Li Min, you are a Chief Strategy Officer of your company.
Yes.
What's your job?
My job is to develop our corporate strategy from the future's perspective. So we are much more look deep into the customers' change, their needs, their change, and the environmental change. But for us, we believe that to be innovative, it's most important to be really customers' needs driven.
Carl, what is the most important about entrepreneurship? Do you think, given the current circumstances of the trade war, particularly when we look at the high-tech warfare, innovation should be the only most important word that inspires generations of entrepreneurs, Chinese and foreign alike, to win the competition and thrive?
So two things. First, if I can just add on to the last point made, and then I'll answer the question. You were talking about how important it is to listen to what customers are doing. And one company that I've interviewed as part of my research is a company called VIP Kid. And they have a very interesting system for this, which is that they have a call center where every day people are calling with complaints, suggestions, whatever. And every day they have one person who's tasked with collecting what are sort of the most important calls. And everyone from the top management team gets an actual call at the time they want in the morning that's a summary of sort of the key things from before so that they can learn and try to figure out how to innovate around that. But coming to your question about the trade war, indeed, the trade war is surely going to be pushing Chinese companies to innovate more. Because if you're a company like Huawei, which now is having challenges to get its Android operating system and chips from the US, what are you going to do? You're going to put obviously more focus into yourself or other related companies in developing your own system. And in fact, they've already been working for 7 years on their own system similar to Android. And you're going to have more effort into chip making. They already have been doing this some, but they're obviously going to put a lot more effort now to avoid future problems like this. And so already there has been some effort to upgrade in China. Surely the government and companies are going to see this as a much greater need now with the current trade war.
Mr. Ren Zhengfei, founding chairman of Huawei, received an interview, which was rare, by the way. A big surprise, because he always kept a low profile.
Yep.
In the interview, he said he would prefer to avoid arousing nationalism or populism in winning this competition. By the way, many observers, particularly those Western ones, refuse to adopt the wording of trade war, because this is a comprehensive rivalry between two powers, one rising, the other receding power. Therefore, it's comprehensive competition. So if you were in the shoes of Ren Zhengfei, Li Min, what would you do to encourage the employees of the company and to shape a good image, a healthy one, so that the momentum of Huawei's development will be maintained?
I read the interview of Mr. Ren Zhengfei. To be honest, I totally agree what he said. First of all, Huawei should be transparent. He should, as the leader of Huawei, he should tell the world the attitude, what Huawei thinks, or what Huawei believes. And I truly appreciate he's still very open, and his comment of the U.S. suppliers, vendors are very encouraging, and he's not blaming anybody. He's actually praising their efforts to help Huawei to survive this trade section. But meanwhile, we realize that Huawei has been very actively in identifying their true strategical strengths, which is innovation. They spend much more than 12% of their revenue into their R&D. So therefore, Huawei has a lot of what they call the backup ties, like chips and like iOS. So I think Huawei, somehow they are very strategically confident. They know there's a huge storm coming, but Huawei is strategically, I think, confident in overcoming this difficulty.
One of the key points that he came up with, I wonder if you have noticed, is he refused to use the phrase of self-reliance in doing R&D. He says, in the age of globalization, Huawei is part of the global supply chain, and our ability to survive largely depends on partnership with the overseas players. So, ironically, at the same time, many Chinese experts are voicing the strong message: we must do whatever we can to rely on our own strength, to rely on our own resources. So what do you think of this critical point that was raised by Mr. Ren Zhengfei?
I think there's some validity in it. I think what we're probably going to see is hopefully some balance. I think that would be the ideal. I think that you want to have at least alternative suppliers, and ideally, probably in the current situation, a supplier or internal abilities to do some things. But, for example, make chips and have an operating system. But I think that it's unlikely that any single company, no matter how great and how large you are, could be the leading edge in everything. And of course, what we learn in business is you should specialize. You should specialize as an individual, understanding what are your strengths and weaknesses, and surrounding yourself by a team that complements your weaknesses. And as a company, you should focus on what you're good at and collaborate with others that are good in other areas that you need. So I think if Huawei would decide that long term they want to do everything themselves internally, and that's all they want to do, that probably won't be the best strategy moving forward. Balance is what's needed.
Well, what do you think of the importance of relying on international partnership instead of turning inward?
Well, as I said, I think this is really what's needed long term. I mean, both for China and for the world, by the way. I mean, it's very clear that collaboration it makes everyone more prosperous, and all companies who are doing that more prosperous. So I think moving forward, I hope that we will find more ways to have lower tariffs and less of that.
Following the latest financial meltdown that took place in 2008 in Wall Street, a lot of the family-based businesses and small and medium-sized enterprises in mainland China woke up to the brutal fact that unless they could transform themselves into digital-intensive, capital-intensive, technology-intensive factories, they won't survive the next wave of industrialization in China. With the rise in service industry, people are well educated as they come back from the United States and Europe. Family businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises, would have to use innovation to sharpen their competitive edge. Now, what have you discovered in this tidal wave of transformation? We have this tier system, it seems. In the more prosperous coastal areas like Fujian, Guangdong, Shenzhen is part of that. And with the completion of the bridge that connects Hong Kong, Macau, and Guangdong, it seems the Great Bay Area will help facilitate competitiveness.
Indeed, there's a lot of exciting things happening there. I think there's sort of two parts that are important to keep in mind for your question. One is that, of course, when you're in an environment where there are a lot of different companies that are doing exciting things, that pushes all the companies forward. It's a little bit of Michael Porter, the famous Harvard professor's argument of clusters, right? And so the fact that Huawei is successful is helped by the fact that ZTE is also based there and other companies. The second thing is, one of the reasons you ask about family businesses and can smaller family businesses be successful, or the sort of second-tier businesses, how can they become more innovative and more successful? And obviously, we need a lot more than Huawei for China to be successful, right? And so this is the question. And that's the reason that I'm engaging in the research that I am, trying to understand what management practices can facilitate innovation. Let's take an example of one company in Shenzhen called BPI, which is dealing with the Human Genome Project. One of the key things that they've decided that's important for driving innovation is finding a mission that employees can really believe in and that they can clearly communicate. They believe that trying to help solve the human genome problem can be one of the key things of this. And then they take their learnings and try to apply these to healthcare in different ways. One of the interesting things they did is they want healthcare to be accessible to everyone. And very often some medical solutions, some drugs, etc., are very expensive and only accessible to a few people. And so they actually did some crowdfunding to try to themselves pay to have one particular disease be able to be treated totally for free in Guangdong province, as one example.
Well, that concludes the first part of our program with Professor Cao Fei from Aalto University School of Business and Li Min O, Chief Strategy Officer of BeSpurt. For the second half, when we come back, I'll continue the discussion on China's innovation capabilities with Charles Liu, founder of How Capital. Stay with us. We'll be right back. I'm so pleased to be joined in the second half by Charles. So the first question, I'm afraid, is how can Chinese companies survive the tough competitions that we're having with the United States, whose government vows to nip it in the bud, to have a zero tolerance, to have a zero-sum game. So what do you think should be the competitive edge of the Chinese companies under such adverse circumstances?
I think first and foremost, it's going to be very, very difficult for the U.S. to reverse globalization. China has succeeded in achieving miracles in the globalization process by building infrastructure, by enhancing efficiency, by innovating in manufacturing, in products, and in all you can imagine, in every sector which has benefited the world. I think the integration of the economies of China and the EU and the US are such that it's very difficult to reverse. For example, if you take out Huawei, who's going to supply the components and the spare parts to 25% of the rural telecommunications network in the United States? Who's going to supply it to the City of London? So I think first, US may claim a big show for what they want to do, but it's not going to be easy for them to achieve it.
No one questions the importance of the global supply chain, for which Huawei remains an important part. However, by the end of the day, we focus on the single most important issue of a competitive edge. In theory, what do you think makes the most important competitive edge of a company?
It depends on the sector it's in. In terms of Huawei, it's in a lot of science and technology. That ultimately takes years of R&D and spending money after money after money. In some other sectors, it may not take that much to innovate, a change in the business model. How did e-commerce begin in China?
Well, just let's look at the case study of Huawei and ZTE. On the initial stage of the trade war between the United States and China, I want to call it tech war. ZTE was singled out by the United States for the alleged violation of contracts. Now, in comparison with ZTE, what superiority or better advantages that Huawei boasts of?
I think Huawei spent multiple times in R&D than ZTE. ZTE was quick on doing business, getting contracts, selling equipment, and the equivalent is basically putting together components from other people. Huawei spent a lot of money in developing their own technology, developing their own chips, developing their own modules. That built a base, and that's also what some in the U.S. are afraid of.
What do you think of the controversial issue of being a wolf in a tough competition? In the competition of a survival of the fittest, it seems the rules are pretty brutal.
But I would like to go back a little bit to what you were saying before in terms of global sales. There was a big article, I think it was in Bloomberg yesterday, about Africans being very, very nervous because they depend on Huawei not only on their infrastructure but also on the handset. What will happen if they cannot get upgrades on their handsets? I think what Huawei has done is aggressively pursue the markets and lay the foundation to make them an indispensable part of daily life. And this is their actual strength. That's the strategy, and I think it's worked so well.
As a major dynamic emerging market, China is going through a deep and dynamic, comprehensive transformation of its industry, economy, and even society. When we focus our attention on the performance of small and medium-sized enterprises, I mean family businesses in most cases, what do you think of the inspirations that the first generation of family businesses should have in such similar transformation process? It seems SMEs in the Pearl River Delta region have outperformed similar ones in the Changjiang River Delta region, to say nothing of the underdeveloped part in east and northern China.
Well, I think there's several reasons for this. The simplest reason is if you visit Shenzhen, which has the greatest vitality in terms of science and technology.
You don't have to look at Shenzhen, look at the huge success of Guizhou, where you have the huge base of big data.
That's right.
It's a highly underdeveloped province.
The reason for that is because it's cheap electricity. Data centers require a lot of electricity, and Guizhou and Guangxi actually has a lot of hydropower, which is cheap. And servers running very hot, need refrigeration all the time. Servers themselves need electricity. So I think there's a strategic reason for that. But why I specifically talk about Shenzhen, which is the home base of many of the China's science and technology titans, is Shenzhen is truly a city that's open to all. It's people from all over China. It's wide open, enthusiastic, energetic, and striving to a better goal. And the other part about Shenzhen and the Greater Bay Area actually overall is it's closer to Hong Kong and Taiwan and Singapore and these other places which require the resources of Greater Bay Area for their own development. So I think there's a combination of factors that makes it much more lively and vibrant. But in terms of first and second generation, I think the first generation in China made their money in ways which will no longer be feasible now. The first generation made their money basically using very cheap labor, or they were in real estate, or they were in sectors, 来料加工, processing goods for the Fortune 500. That's not going to happen in the future. Real estate is a different market.
And commodity prices are rising very fast.
That's right. And wages have gone up very fast. So if the second generation is worth their metal, worth their while, they have to look at either diversifying, moving to another sector, or using a different way of conducting their family business. And that's beginning to happen.
4 decades on, since China decided to open itself up, we set our eyes on the sustainability of the Chinese economy, and innovation, AI, big data, cloud computing, so on and so forth, will constitute the bulk of China's national competitiveness. But what do you think of, say, the process of brain drain to brain gain that happened to Taiwan? Starting from the 1950s and 60s, and in the 80s, most talented professionals were coming back from the Silicon Valley and other advanced industrial nations.
Now they work in Shenzhen.
Okay. I wonder if the DPP would allow this to happen with a promotion of security cooperation level between Washington and Taipei. Now, the different issue, I mean, let's look at the counterproductive outcome of the current high-handed China policy imposed by the Trump administration. Now, Chinese students and scholars are not allowed any longer to study in sensitive areas of engineering, bioengineering, science and technology. Yet, in the area of STEM, do you think we enjoy, or we start to enjoy, advantages such as big data and human resources?
I think in terms of STEM, of course, China has a lot more STEM, science and technology, engineering and math graduates than the U.S. The population, I think, is several times larger.
Size matters.
Yeah, size does matter. In China, because the competition is so keen, people go into sectors which seem to have a good future, and this is why they're in STEM, because science and technology is much more advanced. Just a side note on that, I'm disappointed that much of the STEM is for short-term improvement in business model, in technology, not for fundamental research. Because innovation has two aspects. One is those that immediately impacts on society, immediate improvements in people's lives, and fundamental scientific research, what we call hard science, which takes many, many years and a lot of money to develop.
Charles, we not only look at the issue of a first or second generation of family businesses and transformation of those parts of the private economy. We also look at the issue of branding and why on the first stage of China's economic development we were able to copy, to be a copycat, to have produced a lot of cheap products instead of acting like Huawei, which spend billions of dollars each year in R&D sector. Do you think in the next stage we have to look at not only more investment in the branding, research, but also CSR, corporate social responsibility?
Okay, that's two questions. First, copy. This is something that we're being accused of. Copy, copy, copy. But I think if you really look at, as I was participant in the 1980s and 1990s in China's development, it is the Western market leaders who demanded China to make copies of things because that's what the markets wanted and that's what they wanted to sell. So the Chinese initially making copies of things to be sold in Walmart, Costco, and so on were on the request of the buyers. So the difference today, of course, is the buyers may constitute the 300 million Chinese population, which is really quite different. So there could be some new developments there because you have to start thinking about your market, just like the market then demanded what the Western companies wanted the Chinese to produce.
Well, I'm afraid that the development of a low value-added and labor-intensive production is over. What about the issue of corporate social responsibility?
Okay, the hottest discussion today, especially in Europe, but also partly in the US, is ESG, environment, social responsibility, and governance. In fact, investment funds that's dedicated to this is now about $550 billion US. And the Norwegian pension fund, the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, which is 1 trillion euros, is dedicating 20% to just this sector. I think social responsibility is becoming a much more important sector or issue for people to consider, together with environment and corporate governance.
Yes, indeed. Scandinavian countries such as Norway is more interested in how to spend money on peacemaking. For example, the Oslo Peace Prize and Land for Peace process was embarked upon with the help of the Norwegian government.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for being with us, Charles. I really appreciate your analysis about the competitive edge of Chinese companies and the adverse circumstances of the trade war. See you next time. Goodbye.